Well, I'm Rachael Clinton Chen, and I am the Director of Teaching and Care here at the Allender Center, and also just have the privilege of facilitating and teaching and getting to work alongside colleagues I really love. And I'm here today with Mr. Wendell Moss, my colleague and friend, and two of our former virtual story workshop participants, because today we want to talk a little bit about our virtual story workshop. We know many of you have questions about how does something like the story workshop translate into a virtual format. So we thought instead of trying to just tell you more, we'd kind of show you by jumping in a conversation about what our experience was like. So let me just, obviously, I want to introduce the people here. I've introduced Wendell. I want to introduce Keisha Wilkinson, who participated with us in April. She's also a minister and works with the Impact Movement, who are our partners. And so, I think she will tell you more, but I feel like she got a little coerced to come do the story workshop, and I'll let her tell that story. And we're also here with Brent Stucker, who has many different connections through different family members and his own experience with the Allender Center, but he's an engineer, and even as we were just talking beforehand, said, often feels like the odd one out in a context like a story workshop. So obviously we'll let him share more about what that experience has been for him. But before we jump in, want to just make sure and give you a very basic preview of what the story workshop is. So it is a 3-day with a 4th day kind of 2-hour orientation to the time, a 3-day workshop where you get to get teaching and facilitated small group work in groups of 6 participants with 1 facilitator, and you bring a story from childhood. And the purpose of the workshop is to really get to explore the patterns and themes of your story that have shaped who you are today and really who God has called you to be. Now, the caveat is that typically we're inviting people to bring a story of harm from their childhood, a story that maybe they could say has shaped them or impacted them in a way that it's worth doing some investigation. So the whole kind of goal of the story workshop is really just to receive encouragement and wisdom as you seek to understand how your story has shaped who you are and how to tell it in a way that maybe is more truthful and meaningful. And you get to do that by hearing teaching. You hear from Wendell, you hear from myself, you hear from Dan and a few others. And by participating in small group work that has a guided facilitator, and you're really just sharing stories and hearing other people's stories and engaging around those stories. Obviously, this year with the realities of COVID, we've decided to bring our story workshop into a virtual format. So all of that is taking place in a virtual format, very similar to this. And we've really worked hard to enhance what that experience could be by making sure there's really good self-care guidance and even some self-care videos that you can participate in. And we have some follow-up care and some follow-up teaching, so you actually get extra teaching content. But enough of that. I want to just dive in because we can share more with you about the virtual experience as we go. So maybe this would be a question for Brent and Keisha as we get started. Why did you decide that the virtual story workshop in April that we did this past April, why was now the right time for you to do the story workshop? And feel free to jump in as you wish.
Would you like to go first, Keisha, or would you like me to? No,
you can go ahead.
All right. So surprisingly, I've been wanting to do a story workshop for a while. It seems like a kind of a nice, easy way to enter into what the Allender Center has to offer. My wife had done a certificate program, and although now I hope to do that as well, that's a bit much to chew off as your first thing. And so having seen that all the story workshops were going to be in places and times that I couldn't attend, I had written it off for the year. And just happened the day before the stories were due to hear that the story workshop had not been canceled, but had actually been moved online. And quickly said, hey, is there still room for me to attend? And sent in my application and wrote my story and turned it all in 24 hours time. just kind of like just went for it. Like, when else am I going to be stuck at home? I can't travel with my job because normally I was supposed to be traveling with my job, so I couldn't travel. And so I took a couple days off and just sat in my basement right here, this exact same spot that I'm in right now for the story workshop. And so, yeah, really it was having interacted with the material from the Allender Center and having, met Dan through the Restoration of the Heart conference he co-sponsored years ago. Just really wanted to go more in depth with this, and it just kind of fell in my lap out of nowhere, and I did it.
Thank you.
Yeah, for me, there's a bunch of different reasons. Work-wise, I work with a ministry called the Impact Movement, and we have a partnership with the Allender Center, and we've had multiple staff go through story workshop, as well as the staff member that has gotten certificates from the Allender Center. So I knew a lot about it, but I had no idea what the story workshop was. So I kind of went in blind. I did not know what was going to happen, but I knew that I wanted to be involved because I love all the Allender Center staff, and I've heard great things about the experiences that my coworkers have had, but also God has been taking me through this journey of like remembering things that happened in my childhood, and I just didn't really know what to do with them. So all those memories, and I was feeling like God has given me these memories back for a reason. Yeah. And I think this would be a great opportunity, even if it's just one story, to be able to engage this and maybe even get a glimmer of some of the reasons why God wants me to revisit some of the things that happened during my childhood.
Well, I'm so glad you joined us. And I want to say to both of you, like, your courage to lean into to a story workshop at such a time as this is just still really humbling to me. And part of why we have said, you know what, we know God wants to keep doing work with people and their stories and is revealing. And so we've got to be faithful to that and adapt. So this is a question for all three of you, because Wendell, I'd also want to hear from you as a facilitator, because I know we all had some concerns about, like, how do we do this in a virtual way? So we received a lot of questions from people asking, what will it be like to participate in the story workshop virtually? What would you say to someone who wants to do story workshop but is really nervous about that virtual aspect of things?
Well, I'll go and start. To be honest, when I first contemplated doing the story workshop virtually, it made me nervous. I actually had a lot of doubts because I've only done story workshop face to face. I've lost track of how many story workshops I've done. And so coming into it, I just didn't know how it was going to possibly work really well as far as being present in the story. But it probably was after our first round of stories where I found myself flat out surprised. Because what I discovered was there was really no less the desire to engage story. I found myself still able to be present to the stories. I felt the group members still able to be present in the stories. We were still able to dialogue. I didn't have the visuals, like the bodily visuals. That felt different.
Yeah.
But I still felt presently surprised how I was still able to engage their face, engage their voice, engage the content, and actually found myself really surprised and relieved when it came to it. So I can imagine that people who are coming to story workshop, especially if they talk to people who have experienced the in-person, like they would imagine that this would be kind of a less than. And I want to say, I think you will find yourself quite surprised how really, nonetheless, it is still pleasant, a sweet surprise to be able to engage story. You still get to do really good work and have really good engagement. I can't touch them as I would wish. I can't be physically present, but I can still be present. and my groups, we have enjoyed how present we're able to be, even virtually. So.
Thank you. What about you guys? What would you say to people who are like, I have interest, but I'm nervous about this virtual reality of things?
Yeah, I was nervous as well, but I decided to do it anyway. One, because I had nowhere else to go. I was like, I'm not doing anything else. But at the same time, like being in that space, I think for me, in some ways, it was helpful for me to do it virtually instead of in person. Because like I was having emotional responses from the teaching. Like, so, and I think for me, it like aided in this support of like, I didn't feel embarrassed for having these emotional responses. I felt more comfortable like taking a break and dealing with my feelings, and coming back and still asking questions. But then also being able to still have my group time and say like, I responded this way to this during the training time, and be able to have conversation about that. Even though I wasn't physically there, they didn't get to see it, I still felt comfortable to share it. So I think for me, and I think that's just because emotionally I was just in an interesting place where it would have been really difficult for me to be in this space. But at the same time, like I was able to experience so much, and I'm still chewing on a lot of the stuff that I learned and experienced. And even having moments missing my small group and remembering the stories and the encouragement and the words that they shared, and even just chewing on like, you know, how has this story tied in with other stories that I have, and how has it affected the way I encounter the world and places and things like that. Like I never thought that I would have so much of an experience that would keep me in a place of thinking and praying and considering like how did this story affect my entire life, and how does God call me to change and shift based off of what I've learned from it.
It's good.
Well, for me, I would say going in, I was a little bummed that I wasn't going to have this in-person experience that I'd heard other people explain that they had. But coming out of it, I wasn't bummed at all. I mean, it just really, it was just really good. I felt like people were very real. I did miss, some of the in-person stuff that Wendell talked about, being there in the flesh, but I think it added a unique opportunity for people like Keisha was saying, who maybe being in a big group wasn't the way they needed to hear this, so they could experience it in a way, but still then have those small group breakouts where you saw everyone's face. And the beauty of Zoom, which I hadn't experienced before, is that you can have everybody in a gallery view and your whole group, and you can actually see maybe even more faces simultaneously than you can live, because you don't have to turn your head so much because they're all in a similar area in your view. And I think, and their faces are right there, like it's not at a distance. So I think you can see expression and emotion in a way that I hadn't expected, that really made up for some of the lack of physical presence, that made it feel very real to have so many people's faces just right there with you when we were telling our story, as well as listening to stories. Just people felt present, and so it worked way better than I thought it would.
Yeah, I mean, I could even say, as I didn't have the privilege of being in a small group, which I love. It's such an honor to get to journey with people in that way. But I did have the opportunity to teach, and it's the same thing. Like there's a different kind of intimacy when you're, instead of standing in a room with 80 people and you're here and maybe someone's really far away and you can see everyone's faces, but it's another thing to have like a gallery of people's faces and to know that your face is up close and personal, and both the vulnerability of that. But I think, to Keisha, to your point, the also the safety of my body being here in my home. And honestly, as a little bit like, I'm going to apologize now because I feel more fierce in my teaching, because some of the fear I might have that presents in my body in the physical space of other people, I don't have. So I maybe take more risks or am more bold, which was an interesting, kind of an ironic twist to me, because I think the perception would be there's something distancing about not getting to be together in the flesh. And there certainly are some losses to that, but also some gains. Keisha, tell me maybe what surprised you about Story Workshop? You've kind of shared some things. Was there anything that stands out to you that you go, okay, I didn't really know what I was opting in, so there was a whole learning curve there, but what maybe surprised you about your experience?
I went in ready to fight, for lack of a better word, because I knew. So what I did, so we were added to a Facebook group before, and I noticed that pretty much everybody was white. So I was very uncomfortable. So I went in and was just like, these people go tell me about my story. And I was just like, I'm ready to tell you that this is not, what you say is probably not going to be right. So I went in with this idea. But like, I feel like having a group, being in a group of people, and some of which were white women and white men, were able to speak into my story in ways that I never thought that they could. But also it was like healing to hear some of the stuff that they said about the story that I brought. So it ended up being an interesting chance to get healing that I wouldn't have gotten if I just went to counseling for it. Like, I feel, at least in my opinion, I don't think I wouldn't have got that, because it was just this random person that never had any counseling that spoke into my story, that represented the person that was a person of hurt for me. And that was like life-changing and so healing, to be able to experience something like that. But then also to feel protected by the person that was leading our small group. So if anything was said or done, that I knew that I didn't have to fight for myself, that, somebody was going to speak up for me. So like, I felt comfortable with sharing, because right away I found out that I was going to be protected.
Wow. Well, I want to come back to something there, Wendell. I want to ask you a question, because Keisha's pointing out something. She gets on that Facebook group. She sees a sea of white faces. We're in a time in our culture, and nothing is new. Nothing that's coming above ground is new, but it's certainly out in different ways. So what are some of the ways that we as a staff and as a team are trying to anticipate nuances of care, because people need different care based on their embodied experience of the world. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to some of the spaces of care that might be available to our participants of color.
I want to say either, I'm not getting my time frame right, but I think maybe a year ago, one of the things that the space that we created for our CERT training, and we call it the only one in the room. And the premise of that is that many people of color, and especially if you've been in and out in the center event, on some level what it's like to be the only person of color in the room. And one of the things that I know, as I have worked in the Allender Center from its conception, there have been so many moments that I work here and I have craved space that I could receive care as a man of color, as a Black man. And so I think as we have continued to see folks of color want to come, those of us of color have said that we need to be committed to providing spaces where they are not the only one in the room. And in those spaces, what's it like for them uniquely as people of color to be able to tell their story? because in many communities of color, this kind of work is it's not common, and so it can often be a new space. And so we want to acknowledge that when we go in that space. What's it like to bring not only your face that doesn't feel reflected in many of the other faces, but also when it comes to bringing your stories for folks of color, what's that like? We get a chance to be together. We get a chance to process together, care for one another, offer encouragement to one another during those times. And those spaces have just brought a lot of life to our participants of color. And I think I can also say for our facilitators of color, including myself, it has ricocheted and brought me life. So it's not just for the participants. I think we can selfishly say it's for us too.
Yeah. Thank you. Brent, what has lingered with you since your time in April with us at the story workshop?
A lot. I mean, I'd say there's been aspects of my story that I brought that I didn't expect the group to speak into, and recognize things from the story that I didn't see at all. And so unpacking aspects of where I didn't realize ways, patterns of behavior, ways of responding in my family history that I was perpetuating, or that had affected me in the way that it really does. Specifically kind of being the stoic, settler kind of person who has to be self-made and not really show emotion or fear or whatever. You're supposed to show that you have it all together. As we unpacked my story with my team, there's just a lot of just things that I, not able, just seeing how I've just been unable to express my emotions well my whole life, and how they've noticed something in my story that I just didn't expect them to see. And so I'm still unpacking that with my family. I read my story to my family. That was a bit risky, and it goes over differently doing that than in the story workshop, because they haven't all just listened to people talking for hours about story. But yeah, so that's been a great experience. And then just reflecting on the mix of stories that I got to be honored to hear from people who grew up in different regions of the world, from different cultures, men and women, and totally different types of hard stories. But yet the hurt, the trauma, the healing we all need is yet the same. We all come with a different story, and the specificities of each of those stories are important to hear. Because we all have a different path. But what it did is it made me recognize at some level the similarities, but also the differences between these paths. And it's also made me, I guess, just more aware of like everybody has a surprising story that I had no idea was part of their past. And when I see somebody react, I'm more cognizant of the fact that that they have a story. I might not know the story, and if I could know them more, maybe I could understand why they reacted that way. Maybe I need to ask some good questions. Maybe I need to be a safe person for them to talk to. And those are all things that are far outside my normal day-to-day as an engineer doing. I'm not trained to be a person who engages emotionally, but yet that's so much of just who we're made to be as people in the image of God. So it's been I don't know. It's still, there's a lot of work left to do, but I still think there's just a lot of stuff I'm carrying from it, and looking forward to the next experience of something similar to go deeper.
Well, I think what's interesting is all three of you named in different ways and for different aspects of the story workshop that there's something about other people offering you kindness and like the kindness of God and seeing your face and actually being able to join you in something of your lived experience and to honor you that I know changes us. And so one of the things I just love about the Spirit of God is that it's not bound by technology. It's not bound by the ways we have to innovate to be together. And I love, like, that is so deeply encouraging for me to hear, because I think we all did have questions like, can this work in this format? So as a final question, before we just let people know if they're interested, how they can participate in the story workshop, I just want to hear very briefly from you guys, what are some tips you would give people about care for themselves if this is something they step into? Like, how did you tend to your body? Wendell, maybe a little bit of, like, as a facilitator, how did you care for your group? And just what are some tips you'd give people? And then we'll let them know how they can find out more information.
Yeah. One of the things that I did say, because some people came in, being disappointed that it wasn't face to face. And so one of the things I told our participants, like, that's okay. It's okay to be disappointed that you're not face to face. Like, let there be room for that. And we can all talk about it and acknowledge that. And secondly, can we create an imagination nonetheless for there can be goodness here virtually. We still can be with each other, even though we would wish for much more. And so first, acknowledging that there could be more, inviting imagination, but I think thirdly, just like you would in person, even though it's virtually, be finding spaces outside to bring care for yourself, whether it be taking walks. I think a big way I care for myself is I exercise and working out. That's a big way that I care for myself. And those things I do, whether I'm in person or virtually. So nonetheless, finding sweet ways to care for yourself. And it's kind of fun being at home, you can go and grab some out of your own refrigerator to eat, so there's just some home things that you can do that feel real fun. So you get to provide some good homely care. So those things that come to my mind.
Mm-hmm. What about you guys?
I think taking walks, after or during the breaks were really good. Get out and move, get some fresh air. Luckily, I live in the mountains, and so was able to walk out and be in nature. But if you could go to a park or anywhere to see a little nature, and I think give yourself, maybe prepare your family if you're with a family, or your roommates if you're with roommates, to say, I'm not sure if I'm going to want to talk or not after this is over. Right. Could you just give me some grace to either engage or not, depending upon where I am? Because sometimes I really felt like just jumping in with the family, and other times I didn't. Right. And they were really gracious. So maybe prepare whoever you're around that, could you be gracious with me either way, right? So.
Right, absolutely.
Good, Brent.
I second that. I had one of my close friends. She was on standby, so just in case I needed somebody to continue to process with. Because sometimes it feels like, the time that we had in our group, sometimes it feels like you still have a lot of stuff that are kind of roaming around in your brain, and sometimes you just want to just kind of put it out. So I had a friend that was like, just be on standby. It's just in case I need somebody to talk to.
Yes, ma'am.
I need somebody here, so I'm not talking to my wall. Looking crazy.
Ma'am.
But also, it's hard to be on screen that long.
Yes.
So what I started to do after the first day, I was exhausted. So what I started to do was actually take my camera off every once in a while and just kind of stared into space as I listened and took notes instead of staring at the screen. But then I also, afterwards, I didn't have no plans for after. So I didn't plan to do anything. I still went to sleep early every night because it's just exhausting to be on screen that long.
Yes.
I wanted to be engaged the entire time, especially in those small groups. Right. So I made sure that I rested, that I journaled, that was helpful because we can forget a lot of the things that we heard from others, as well as what we've been thinking and processing ourselves. So I think journaling is really important. And really just took time to give myself grace. So if there's anything else that I have responsibilities for, being like, could somebody else take this? Can somebody else do this? And really kind of leave and save those 3 days for me and for whatever God had for me to receive. And then also as a minister, it's hard to go into spaces like this and not think, oh, how can I do this with my students? How can I pour into my students? How can I begin to listen to their stories and help disciple them better? And I was just like, no, we're not doing that right now. This is for me. Let me experience it. Let me enjoy this. Let me get what I need out of this. And then after I'm done, I haven't even thought about it yet. Let me process it. And once I feel like I'm in a place where I've fully processed what I needed, then we can pray about how can I begin to learn use some of the things that I learned to begin to disciple and support my students.
That's good. That's
such
good.
wisdom. Such wisdom there. Yeah. And I think just echo everything you guys have said. And we'll definitely be, one of the things we learned in our first go at a virtual story workshop is that we did need to play with the schedule a little bit, that we couldn't just translate the physical story workshop to a virtual story workshop with the same schedule. So there's a slightly shortened time on screens. It's still a lot of time on screens, and to just know what that requires of you and what you'll need. But we'll also be providing more of those resources for you if this is something you opt into, to give you imagination for how to care. So first of all, if you're interested, you can visit theallendercenter.org. You can click on offerings and then virtual story workshop. It'll give you a lot more details, cost, dates. It's coming up in August. And our next one is coming up in August. And it's a short application process, so you can fill out the application there. If you want to talk to someone and actually get more insight, you can email admissions@theallendercenter.org and send them your questions, and they'll be sure to follow up. I want to say thank you to each of you for taking time to hop on this Zoom call and just share a little bit more about your experience with the story workshop. And I do definitely think we hope to see many of you joining us down the road for a virtual story workshop.